Hello Year 11, Mr. Azzopardi here with another video for the Christianity unit. And strangely, this video is actually like revision because we've already covered this topic, the problem of evil, when we did the unit on belief in God, I think it was called. Yes, a belief in God from Year 10. But this topic, the problem of evil, comes up in Christianity belief section as well as in the existence of God section, belief in God section. So, it's basically the same information that you need to know. So it's just good that we can just have a recap. So what I've done is I've put a resource together and it should be on Teams. And really, if you have your notes from before about the problem of evil, you might be able to just fill this in without the video, the resource. But I'm going to basically take you through. So if you're not sure, if you've forgotten, or if you're unclear about anything, I'm just going to talk you through this resource. Now, it'd be great if you can print the resource out because then it's just got a load of questions that you need to answer. If you can't print the resource out, then you can just make notes based on the video because I'm going to put everything that you need on the screen as we go through. So it's up to you. If you, like I say, if you can print the resource out, great. If you can't, then it's not a lot more writing because you're really just in the resource that I've given you just gives you a load of questions to answer, and I'm just going to answer those questions here. So yeah, we're going to go through what the problem of evil is, and we're going to go through 3 responses to the problem of evil from Christians. That is the Augustinian from St. Augustine's Theodicy, the Irenaean Theodicy from Irenaeus, and the Book of Job, what the Book of Job says about the problem of evil. So here's the first section. J.L. Mackie is a philosopher who is famous for coming up with the phrase the inconsistent triad. He did not invent the problem of evil. He's not the first person to come up with that problem, but he's famous for kind of putting it in a really clear way. The inconsistent triad. So the inconsistent triad is the idea that there are 3 things that, according to atheists, I guess, or people who believe that the problem of evil proves there's no God, can't all be true together. And that's the important thing, I suppose, is the problem of evil is a way in which atheists try to prove that there's no God, or at least that there can't be a God of the kind that Christians believe in. And what are those 3 things? So these are the 3 things on your worksheet. This is where you have to label the 3 points of the triangle. Those 3 things are: 1, evil exists in the world. So that means bad things exist in the world. Number 2, one of the other points of your triangle would be God is all loving. And number 3, the third point of your triangle would be God is all powerful. Now, then it says, explain why Mackie thinks that the triad proves the Christian God does not exist. Well, what you'd need to write is something like this. If God is all loving, then he would want to get rid of evil in the world. If he is all powerful, then he should be able to get rid of evil in the world. But evil exists. So either God doesn't exist, or he's not all loving, or he's not all powerful. That's why he thinks that the Christian God doesn't exist. Problem of evil doesn't prove that there's no God, because there could be an evil God, or there could be a God who's all loving but not powerful. But the Christians believe in a God who's all loving and all powerful, and according to the problem of evil, this can't be right, because if he was all loving, he would want to get rid of evil. If he was all powerful, he could do it. It's possible to get rid of evil, but he doesn't get rid of evil. Then underneath there it says, what is natural evil, what is moral evil, give 2 examples. So this is a distinction that's important when you're looking at the problem of evil, because there are different kinds of evil stuff in the world, and how you might explain why that evil exists might be different in each case. So natural evil is evil that is not caused by human beings. Examples could be earthquakes, tsunamis, diseases, those kind of things, flooding, I don't know, that kind of stuff. Moral evil is evil that is caused by human beings, so war, murder, theft, even something like bullying, that kind of stuff. Those are some examples. What is a theodicy? So a theodicy is an attempt to answer the problem of evil. In other words, it's an attempt to explain why an all-loving and all-powerful God would allow suffering and evil in the world. So a theodicy is an attempt to, it's something that Christians would give to answer why God allows evil to exist. And so we're going to look at 3 theodicies, starting with Augustine. So here's the Augustinian theodicy. The theodicy, the explanation of the problem of evil from St. Augustine, one of the most famous Christian philosophers. So he goes back to Adam and Eve. What did Adam and Eve do which went against God? Well, they ate the fruit of the tree, the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. So God said that they could eat anything in the garden except for the fruit in one tree. It was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they ate the fruit, and so they went against God. How does it explain natural evil? Well, the explanation is that the world was a perfect place, but then God, as a punishment for the sins of Adam and Eve, it caused the world to go wrong. And so natural evil came into the world because of their disobedience, because they broke the rules of God, as a punishment for humankind. So in other words, it would mean that human beings are paying the price now for what Adam and Eve did wrong, what the first human beings did wrong. How does it explain moral evil? Well, the idea is that since that time, they kind of caught it. It meant that from that time onwards, human beings were born with this tendency to do things wrong, to go against God. So not only is there suffering in the world, but as a punishment for Adam and Eve's sin, but also there's people are more likely to go against God because Adam and Eve kind of the influence of that first sin meant that people started to turn against God. What's original sin? Well, original sin is the idea that people today are born with the guilt of that original sin of Adam and Eve. So even if you've done nothing wrong, then you are kind of born with that guilt. You deserve punishment, and that's why evil exists in the world. That's one reason. Another way of looking at original sin, some people look at it, the idea that everyone is born with a tendency to do something wrong. So we might not be, some people don't like that idea that we're born guilty, but they say, but we are born with a tendency to do things wrong, so that means everybody actually has sinned against God. Augustine said, evil has no positive nature, but the loss of good has received the name evil. So the point, what does the quote mean? Well, Augustine's point is that God created a perfect world. That's in line with the teachings of the Bible. When God created the world, he said it was good. So God is supposed to be all loving and all powerful. Why would he create a world with bad stuff in it? So there is no such thing as evil. God hasn't created a thing called evil. All that's happened is human beings have failed to live up to the standards that God set for them, and therefore it's not an actual thing that God created. It's just a lack of goodness. Human beings failing to live up to the standards that God set to them. That's what brought evil into the world. But for Augustine, it's really important that evil is not a thing that God invented, because that would make God a bad God because he invented something bad. No, God created a perfect world, and evil is just when the world, because of human actions, does not live up to the way that God intended it to be. How could Augustine's theodicy be criticised? Well, the biggest criticisms that come down to this idea of that evil is really caused by the sin of Adam and Eve. Lots of ways to criticise it. One, from a scientific point of view, we evolved, and therefore there were no two first human beings in the way that that the Bible says there were. So the story of Adam and Eve is probably not true. Even if it was true, we were not there at the time when Adam and Eve did the sin. So it's wrong to blame us for the actions of Adam and Eve. It doesn't make any sense to blame us. Augustine, I think we talked about this, had this weird way where he thought we were in some way present, but even if we were in some way present, we didn't do it. And so that's the biggest problem to me, is why are people being born today being punished for the sins of people who lived thousands of years ago? It doesn't quite make sense morally. Okay, the second theodicy is the Irenaean theodicy, the theodicy of Irenaeus, another Christian thinker. So the question is, according to Irenaeus, why doesn't God force people to always do the right thing? This is important. The reason is because God thinks that free will is really important. Without free will, without the ability to make our own decisions, our life would be meaningless, and therefore our life only gets meaning when we make our own decisions and choose our own paths in life. And so he has to give us free will. Of course, that brings the possibility of moral evil, because if we couldn't do moral evil, if it was impossible for us to do moral evil, we wouldn't have free will. So that's one reason why there's evil in the world, because free will is really important. Why does God allow natural evil in the world? Well, natural evil is there as a way to help us to develop morally. Without some bad things to face in the world, according to Irenaeus, we wouldn't be able to grow as people. So in other words, we're talking about we get ill, and that helps us to learn compassion for others who are ill, patience, and bravery. And a group of people somewhere in the world get an earthquake happens, and their homes are destroyed. And that gives us the opportunity to show bravery, courage, and compassion by going over there and helping those people. John Hick agrees with Irenaeus' ideas. He says, in a world devoid of dangers to be avoided, we may assume that there will be virtually no moral development. What does he mean? Well, he means if there was no bad stuff in the world, we wouldn't be able to develop morally. We wouldn't be able to grow as people, because most times when we grow, in fact, maybe all times that we grow and we become better people, it's through facing some kind of difficulty in our life. How could the Irenaean theodicy be criticised? Well, there's a few ways. One is that there are some kinds of suffering that doesn't seem to help us to grow morally. So some kind of extreme forms of suffering can cause people not to grow, but it can cause them to become worse people. So you might think of something like post-traumatic stress disorder. Some soldiers who've seen terrible things in war. Yeah, in some cases, that can help. Going to war can help you grow in terms of courage and taking responsibility and organisation and those kind of things. But in other ways, in some situations, it can cause people to be, it can cause real psychological damage, and that people can end up being, becoming more violent, depressed, and all those kind of things. So suffering doesn't always help us to grow as people. Second way to say is that, well, if we're saying the suffering, say if I say, well, it's good that God caused an earthquake or volcano to erupt on the other side of the world, because that meant that I could become a more compassionate person by going to help the people caught up in the earthquake. Well, that doesn't seem right, does it? Is it really right to let a group of people suffer just so that I can develop morally? Doesn't seem right. Okay, number 3, the book of Job. Now, first thing it says is summarize the book of Job, what happened to Job, in 5 bullet points. I'm not going to go through 5 bullet points. You can make up your own, but I'll just talk through what the story is. So Job is a man who's very devoted to God, and then in the story, the devil and God have a conversation. The devil says that he could turn Job against God, and the God says that he doesn't think he could, and they have a little kind of almost like a bet to see if he can. So the devil causes lots of bad things to happen to Job. Remember that when we say the devil causes them, God's allowing him to do this, right? So the devil causes lots of bad things to happen to Job. Lots of his family are killed. He loses lots of his cattle, which would be his wealth back then, and lots of terrible things happen. He still doesn't turn against God, so then the devil afflicts him with a terrible illness, and so on and so on and so on. And eventually, he doesn't turn against God, but eventually he starts to ask God why he's sent all these punishments. All of his friends say to him that he must have done something wrong to be punished in this way, but Job insists he's done nothing wrong. Now I've got 2 quotes. There are actually 2 ways to think about the theodicy in the book of Job. I'm going to go for the long quote first. So he asks God why he's sent him, why he's allowed him to suffer in this way when he's a good person. And God says, "Who is this ignorant person saying these foolish things? Where were you when I made the earth? If you are so smart, answer me. And who decided how big the earth should be? Who measured it with a measuring line? You wanted to argue with God all-powerful. You wanted to correct me and prove that I was wrong. So give me your answer." How does this quote answer the problem of evil? Well, what it's talking about is the idea that God is transcendent. God is beyond human understanding. And therefore Job and human beings in general have no place to ask God why he did what he did. That the actions of God and why God does what he does are beyond our knowledge. We're just nothing compared to God, and therefore we can just assume God must have his reasons for letting us suffer, but we don't know what they are. That's one theodicy in the book of Job. Quite easy to criticise, because you could just say, well, it doesn't really answer the question. It just says it's a mystery. So for a lot of people, that's unsatisfactory. Another one here says, what about this quote? Then God made Job successful again. God gave him twice as much as he had before. So at the end of the story, Job is rewarded for the fact that he didn't turn against God. But that's a bit odd. I always think it's a bit odd, because he did in a way, because he started to question God. But according to the story, he didn't really turn against God. So he gets rewarded, and he gets twice as much as he had before, loads of animals and stuff. And he also gets more family. Again, it's a bit of an odd part of the book, because his family have been killed. Is it really make it better if his family gets killed to give him more family? I don't know. How could that be? And so how does it answer the problem of evil? And that the answer it gives is that it kind of shows that evil is a test, that God is testing people, testing their faith, basically saying to them, like, will you stay loyal to God through all this evil? If you do, you'll be rewarded. And of course, we know that people aren't always rewarded people aren't always rewarded in this life in the way that Job is. But Christians might say, but if you're not rewarded in this life, you will be rewarded in heaven when you die. So you'll be... Sorry, I have to take a break there. I'm back now. What was I saying? So the idea is, the theodicy there is saying you're tested. Evil is to test your faith. Will you give up believing in God if loads of bad things happen to you? And if you don't, if you keep believing in God and stay true to God, then you'll be rewarded in heaven. How could this be criticised? Well, you could say, well, how come God tests some people more than others? Some people get loads of suffering, and some people get hardly any suffering. So surely that makes it harder for people who get loads of suffering to get to heaven, because they've got more reason to question their faith. Also, it just seems a cruel thing to do, because in a way, by making us suffer, God seems to be presenting us with loads of evidence that he doesn't exist. Isn't it cruel to try and like do loads of stuff that makes it seem like he doesn't exist, and then punish us in hell in our afterlife if we give up believing him, when it's him that gave us the reason to stop believing him? If that makes sense. Okay, so when you fill in your worksheet or got all your notes about the three theodicies, I want you to see if you can write a SE plus E, just one, in response to this question. Evil happens because God is punishing humans for the sin of Adam and Eve. Discuss this statement. Obviously, that's one that Augustine would agree with. The others would disagree. So look, you can do any theodicy. I've put Augustinian here, but I just want you to explain one and then put how it could be criticised. So some Christians might agree because you could just say because they follow the Augustinian theodicy, or the theodicy of St. Augustine. And then you say the Augustine theodicy says, and you explain it, says that evil came into the world because of the sin of Adam and Eve. They ate the fruit of the tree in the Garden of Eden, which they were forbidden to eating. And from this time, original sin has been passed down to human beings. Everyone's born with a tendency to do bad things, but also there's natural evil in the world because we're being punished for Adam and Eve's sin. So this means that evil things in the world, you could say something like it in the explanation. This means that God didn't create evil in the world, but evil came into being because of the sin of Adam and Eve. And then you give a criticism. You could put, this could be criticised because it doesn't seem fair that we are being punished for the sins of Adam and Eve. If you want to do a different one, try a different one. So you could say some Christians might disagree because they follow the Irenaean theodicy. And you say, Irenaeus said that evil exists in the world for two real reasons. Moral evil exists because human beings have to have free will. Without free will, our lives would be meaningless. Natural evil exists because we need natural evil to help us develop morally as human beings. Now, you can explain all that together as your evidence and explanation, or you can put the quote in from John Hick and explain the quote. And then how could it be criticised? We could say, well, not all evil helps us to grow and develop. Some natural evil might just make people worse people afterwards. Or you could look at the Book of Job, you could use the Book of Job in there if you want to. So take all your notes and see if you can write one SE plus E in answer to that question. And that's all for today. Thanks, guys.